You have this wisdom, you have this insight into humanity that others don't. But I can tell you, I have met people who have never even left their hometowns, and they are like sages. They just have this understanding of people and understanding what makes people tick. They have this curiosity of the world around them. And so it's not always travel broadens the mind. And
Mhm,
you can have people like Chitra, who's had the privilege of traveling around the world and yet is so stuck in her ways that she will
mhm,
not welcome another perspective. And then you have somebody like Helen, who clearly hasn't traveled the way Chitra has, but has this instinct to learn more about people and care about them and find those ways in which we can all connect to another person if we just make the effort.
This is Story to Count with Jen Jumba. In conversations with writers, something magical happens, and as readers, we begin to see them as human beings and not just the name on the spine of a book. My hope is through these conversations, you learn about their craft and them as a person, you'll become like me. Fiercely loyal, want to read their current book, entire backlist, any future book, or any book they blurb. And when you see their name, you'll want to support them, not only as incredible storytellers, but also the thoughtful individuals you have come to know. And I'm super excited because my guest today is Rajendrani Mukhopadhyay, who has 3 bios, depending on her audience. She has a day job bio, her writer bio, and an unofficial bio. Now, I've read all 3. They're fantastic and demonstrate an individual who is talented in science and the arts, as if both right and left brain are equally gifted. I will share a bit from her writer bio, and you will see how it evolves from her work as a scientist and science storyteller. But I am most interested in what Raj refers to as her unofficial bio, because this is who I am fortunate enough to have a conversation with, and you will all soon hear, who goes by Raj, originally trained as a scientist. After earning her PhD in biochemistry and cellular and molecular biology, wish I had her for a teacher, she launched a career in science communications. For nearly 2 decades, she worked as a science storyteller in various forms, including as a journalist and the leader of an award-winning custom content studio. Her science writing appeared in several print and digital outlets, both here in the United States and in the UK. She was selected by Poets and Writers as one of the fellows for the 2025 Get the Word Out cohort for fiction, a publicity incubator for early career novelists. And her debut novel, Chitra Demands to Go Home, will be published by Modern Art Press next month. She has lived in India, Kuwait, and Canada. She's now based in the U.S. with her partner, 2 children, 2 dogs, and 2 cats. Doubles, like it. Now, this is the fun, her unofficial bio. To know Raj is to know contradictions, analytical and emotional, dreams but lives in deeply rooted practicality, devoted to fiction through novels and films but seeks the truth of science, an extrovert in daily need of solitude, I get that, gets fidgety in one location but is a nervous wreck on airplanes, hates road trips, and only likes trains when they run on time. She parents her children with a firm hand but has no authority over her dogs. If Raj were to have a tombstone, it would say, she said the quiet part out loud. Definitely somebody that you want to not only read, but also have as a friend and on your side for sure. So first of all, congratulations on your debut novel. This is such a wonderful book, wonderful story. How would you introduce Chitra at a cocktail party?
So Chitra is a 75-year-old Bengali woman who is currently living in an assisted living facility in Columbus, Ohio. And she really desperately wants to get back home to India. And she will do almost anything to get back home. So the novel really explores Chitra's current predicament, how she ended up in her current predicament, and starts off with all the things she starts to do to get back home. But as the story unfolds, we get to see how Chitra has lived her life and the consequences of the decisions she made. And it becomes an exploration of the choices we make as parents, as people, as we move through life and face the indignities of aging.
It is a fantastic capturing of the nuances of what it's like to be a human being. And Chitra desperately wants to go home, hence the title, Demands to Go Home. And what's interesting about her is she finds herself in Tranquil Towns, which is the assisted living facility, because she recently had a stroke and she is there recovering. She's too well to be in the hospital, but not ready to go home. And so her life has completely been upended. And so she thinks this is just a quote unquote temporary time in her life where she'll be here and then soon her sons will come and get her and take her home to India. So can you talk a little bit about how that all evolved and the relationship she has with her sons?
So it's basically so much of the book. So Chitra and her husband, when they were raising their family, had made the decision to live abroad outside of India. So, they lived outside of India, raised the kids outside of India, and then they themselves made the choice to go back to India when they were retired. And they have a gorgeous house in Kolkata that they poured their heart and soul into. The house, Chitra feels a deep connection to it. But their kids, because they were raised outside of India, are dealing with what I call third culture kid issues, and some of the stuff that we talk about in the book actually draws from my own personal experiences as being somebody who grew up in the Indian diaspora. Her kids grow up, go to the UK and the US for their educations, decide to carry on their lives in the US, go on to marry people outside of Bengali culture. And basically, their lives are in some ways at odds with what Chitra wants out of her own life. And the book is all about those tensions, about how do you reconcile different cultures that happen in immigrant families. How do you reconcile different expectations when your kids are living in one part of the world, but you want to live in another part of the world? And another tension is, how do you take care of one another when you are literally not in the same geographical location? And that tension of, thinking about her kids and their storyline is they are a sandwich generation. They've got Chitra to take care of, and they have their own families with kids to take care of. And so how do you reconcile all of those tensions? And that's basically the book.
It it is a wonderful example of, I think, what many people listening will experience or have experienced, that they find themselves caught between two, I want to say, loyalties, for lack of a better word, and wanting to do what's right by both of them. And so I found it really interesting. I mean, on one hand, her kids are younger, 30, 40-ish. So they've lived more than half of their life in the US or UK with away from India, whereas Chitra has lived the majority of her life in India. So it is certainly that tension. And throughout the book, we see her wanting to honor some of the culture and the traditions of her Indian, heritage. So it's a wonderful tapestry that you weave throughout the different customs. And I found myself looking up certain words because I wanted to learn more about them and what they meant. So fantastic. So I think we can all relate. And that's the great thing about this book, is that certainly relatable characters, but early on, we learn it's not Chitra would like to go home. It's not Chitra thinks going home would be a good idea. It's Chitra demands to go
Yeah.
home. So it is a strong verb that essentially captures, because we see her early on that, I mean, she doesn't get along with the aide who's coming in, and having suffered a stroke and not being able to do things for herself, she's not very grateful.
No, she isn't. So that part of Chitra, and I have to say, the inspiration of Chitra, I mean, Chitra is a kaleidoscope of so much. She is a character that reflects some of my own fears as a mother. She reflects some of the things I've witnessed other parents do. And I've also done the what if as a novelist, thinking about, what if these were the attitudes. And one of the things about Chitra is that she really is a self-assured person in her own wants and desires, and she doesn't bend. And especially in the time of her life she's in right now. She's a 75-year-old woman, and coming from the Bengali culture as a mother of two sons who is in a ripe age of 75. She feels she has earned her right to get her own way. She's like, I've done everything for my family. I've raised my kids as best of my ability. In fact, I've sacrificed so much to raise them well. And so now it's my turn. It's my turn to reap the benefits of everything I've sowed. Uh, and so she is absolutely unyielding in her sense of entitlement that she gets to live her last part of her life in the comfort of this home that she's built with her husband, and not just live in the home, but live the life the way she wants to, ignoring everything that's happening around her, including the fact that one of her sons is not even well.
Yeah, it is interesting. I also will say that because she's a widow and she lost her husband at a relatively early age, she developed that sense of agency because she had to be more independent to do for herself and to raise her sons. So I find that interesting as well. And she's not able to take care of herself completely. And you alluded to it earlier when you talked about the dignities of aging. Can you talk a little bit about the inspiration for wanting to capture that as part of our life's journey?
Yeah. So that again, it's a mosaic of things that I've witnessed and heard and somewhat experienced. I should though clarify I am not a 75-year-old woman. But what I've some of that came out of, when you've lived your life outside of your home country, and especially in certain parts of the world where you literally went there for a job and to make ends meet, you do feel the urge to go back and go home. It's always been the life plan. It's always been, in the works, but it's not always the case. And what we see with her sons is that there are some places in the world where you can just decide that this is it. This is where you're going to live. This is where home is. And so another theme that comes through the book is, how do we define home?
Right,
And
exactly.
and what makes a home? Is it literally the address that you are putting down that makes it a home? That makes you help it call it a home? Or is it how you are pulling in people around you and pulling in a community around you to make yourself feel like you belong to something. And so that brings another character up in the book, which is a woman named Helen who ignores the prickliness of Chitra, to put it mildly. She's very prickly, gives a hedgehog a good run for its money. Helen and her start having this conversation of what home means. And, that is something I also think is an important conversation that people struggle to have, especially those coming from immigrant families and coming from families that have been part of the diaspora outside of India, of who calls what home. And it can differ from generation to generation, can even differ within a generation. And so that's a topic that the book explores.
In your bio, the official bio, it talks about how you grew up in different places of the world. So, how do you define home? Because you lived in several different countries and you're part of the diaspora. How are you able to reconcile what that is for you, which might be different from what I think or people listening think?
That is a question that I've wrestled with my entire life. I would say today, asking me now in the stage I'm in, home is here in the US. It is where I've raised my children, where I've had a wonderful career, where made a life with my partner, got the two cats and two dogs. You know, I I do have a sense of belonging here in the US. But growing up, especially in my late teens and these where, I was constantly moving and I'd gone through a major life event, living in Kuwait. I mean, I was in my mid teens when the first Gulf War happened and, there was that displacement from the first Gulf War. So home was all of a sudden vanished overnight. So that's where my questioning of how do you define home and what is home really? And I would say through all these experiences and through everything I've had the privilege of living through, I always say home's context dependent and depending on what you're talking about and what do you mean. So as I say, my home is in the US. I've built my life here. But do I feel ties back to the places where have lived? Of course. I have ties to India. In so many ways, my habits, likes, and dislikes, and the way in which I view some of the things in the world is influenced by my country of origin. But there are some other things that have been totally shaped by my time in Kuwait. Even though I lived in Canada very briefly out of all these places, even there, I met my partner there. And so, home is so context dependent to me. It really depends on what is it you're talking about and what is it in the moment you're discussing. So I'll be honest, when we're talking about sports, I find myself very bewildered by things like American football. I still don't understand it. I still feel like an outsider. But there are other ways, music and books and arts and culture. I identify as American in my tastes and my likes.
Such an astute perspective. And I would say that somewhat parallel to Chitra is because she lives someplace for like a long period of time and it's upended, just like your time in Kuwait was upended very quickly overnight. I think we're all kind of an amalgamation of our life experience and our lived experience. And I think that's what makes being open to other people and being curious about other people's backgrounds and life experiences. Whereas Chitra early on, I mean, it's table 17. Everybody knows not to sit with her. And Helen, as a relatively new resident, she comes over and is like trying to figure out why nobody's sitting with her. She finds out very quickly, but yet they have this wonderful conversation and an opportunity to try to connect. Introducing Helen, I think, was that like an opportunity for Chitra to see other perspectives outside her own family dynamics? Because family dynamics and immediate family dynamics are always interesting.
And also for me, Helen is also a manifestation, and I've had amazing people in my life who are, we always assume that just because you've lived in other parts of the world, you've traveled, that you immediately have this worldliness about you. You have this wisdom, you have this insight into humanity that others don't. But I can tell you, I have met people who have never even left their hometowns, and they are like sages. They just have this understanding of people and understanding what makes people tick. They have this curiosity of the world around them. And so it's not always travel broadens the mind. And you can have people like Chitra, who's had the privilege of traveling around the world and yet is so stuck in her ways that she will
Hmm.
not welcome another perspective. And then you have somebody like Helen, who clearly hasn't traveled the way Chitra has, but, has this instinct to learn more about people and care about them and find those ways in which we can all connect to another person if we just make the effort.
Right. I think there's a couple things that bring them together. Helen is recently widowed. So they both have experienced the loss of their husband, and they seem to kind of bond a little bit over the yoga sessions at Tranquil Towns and the yoga instructor, Josh. You know, I think we've all had friends that we end up meeting because we're in a situation and you find yourself like making eye contact and rolling your eyes, and that seems to be the intersection for them to realize, like, wait a second, or more so for Chitra to realize, wait a second. Helen might be okay to sit at table 17 with me and share meals. So
Yeah.
bonding over humor is always kind of a great icebreaker.
Yeah. And also, I would say eventually everybody needs somebody in their lives to keep them company. And no matter how you don't want a place to stick to you, eventually you, you will connect with someone and you have to, otherwise you'll be terribly lonely. And I think that's, part of what Helen manages to crack through with Chitra. Like, she's lonely, like, and she's not even self-aware enough to realize that. But Helen was like, you need a friend, you need a buddy.
And how we all need a little bit of Helen in our lives. I mean, the Surgeon General and here in the United States talks about loneliness, that is this new epidemic, that people are finding themselves without that sense of belonging and without friends, and how quickly we can isolate from others. And Helen is great. I mean, it reminds me a little bit and I've not lived in assisted living. I mean, because I'm not a 75-year-old woman yet. But it reminds me a little bit of the school experience, where you're sharing meals with people. There's different activities, whether it's yoga or art or cooking. And Helen's like, "Hey, come down to my room and watch TV." And I was like, "Okay." And then when I saw what she enjoyed, like Friends and Frasier and Seinfeld and Downton Abbey, I was like, "Okay, I would go over to Helen's room to watch." So
Yeah.
it was a great
It
introduction.
it's also, it's just it doesn't take a lot to connect, and that's the other thing, you don't have to have this deep, intense experience together to forge friendships, or just it could be something as small as, let's just share a cup of tea together. Let's just, hang out. And I think about that a lot, especially when language becomes a barrier. And that's also in the story. Like, Chitra is actually a bit hesitant to speak in English because she feels so much like a duck out of water with having, she speaks English with an Indian accent and not sure about Americanisms, and it's just not comfortable. But even when language forms a barrier, there are ways in which we can forge a connection, and you don't have to be stuck by that.
I think so. I think you refer to it in the book at one point that Chitra is hesitant to talk because people just assume she's dumb and dim-witted, I think is the line that you use in the book, and it's like, "Wait a second,
Yeah.
absolutely not."
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting is Helen really tries to crack through, and she's a tough customer. I mean, she has, like, two-year-old temper tantrums, and I think we've all been at that point. We've all experienced a sense of frustration and a lack of agency when sometimes we don't know what else to do, but I certainly would never, like, throw something at somebody. At least I hope
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. But, again, it's like, as I said, Chitra really is not self aware, really is just like my way or the highway. And to the point, getting really ticked off at the admin staff at the assisted living facility for not recognizing Bengali New Year. And, you know, it's like, why would they recognize it if you don't know about it? Like, if you don't speak up, they're not going to know about it. But she just is affronted that it's not there for her. So, but, again, as a person who's lived part of the diaspora, like, I fully appreciate and have done it myself, how hard and overwhelming it can sometimes become when you and your culture are not part of the mainstream, and you have to constantly explain your food, and you constantly have to explain your customs, and you constantly have to explain every single thing. And to the point, like, your holidays are not the holidays that are celebrated. It is a burden that immigrants carry no matter where they move around in the world. And that burden can boil over sometimes and just get really, really a lot to bear. And so that's some of that, of Chitra cracking under that burden of, and also wanting to go home, because she's like, I'm sick and tired of having to explain
Uh-huh.
why this is important to me. Back home, nobody would even ask why. Everybody would know why this is important to me. But
Right.
here, you're not getting it. It's important to me. It's important to my sense of self. Why can't you see that? And, I was not very sympathetic towards Chitra while I wrote her. I will say that. But, now, after the dust of writing the book has settled, I have some sympathy for her. And I know that, you know, some of the unsavory things she does is out of the whole sense of feeling so displaced, feeling so alone.
Mhm. Yeah, and I always wonder, if you should bear the responsibility to explain your culture to me, that I would rather you reference things in the book. You reference, I'm gonna look it up, dosha. And so,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and so I looked it up to understand. I didn't expect you as a writer to talk about all of that. I looked it up to understand how the five elements of earth basically or the worlds make up, and when they're balanced or in harmony, that's an explanation. And so I get that it has to feel very burdensome, and you almost want to look at people who, when you're displaced, like, am I lazy because I didn't look up what Bengali New Year is, or to know that that's something that Chitra would have observed?
Yeah.
So trying to find that
And
balance.
yeah, and it's funny you bring that up because even writing the book, I kept on sometimes second guessing myself. And my publisher and I oftentimes would have to have this conversation of, do I explain this or do I just leave it here? Some readers are going to understand it, and for some readers, it's going to confuse them, but that's okay. And we really had this ongoing conversation of what is it I explain and what is it I just leave it. And to the point, even I wrestled with them like, do I say Columbus, Ohio, where the assisted living facility is? And then I was like, do I say Kolkata, West Bengal, India? And my publisher was like, no, stop. If people don't know where Kolkata is, they should look it up. The same way people who don't know where Columbus is, they should look it up. So, she was like, don't apologize for not hand holding every single part of the book because a you're talking about people having different experiences coming together and then the tensions that come up when people just come from different backgrounds and experiences and expectations.
Yeah, for those of us in Ohio, when you say Columbus, Ohio, most of us will say OH, and I will wait for the other half to say Ohio. So to those listening, home of Ohio
Yeah,
State or the Ohio State University.
state, the Ohio State. I know that
But,
one.
bring up an interesting point because you don't have nearly the same background or sense of explanation for Helen. I mean, Helen lost
Right.
her husband, David, and kids decided that Tranquil Towns is the best place for her. So a little bit about we touched on earlier is that fact of being curious. And so there are some readers that will be curious or nerdy like me and want to know more about the Bengali traditions that are infused. I mean, I looked up what Shaka was and a Pola, like, forgive
Hmm.
me if I'm not pronouncing things
You
correctly,
got it. Yeah.
or the traditional markings of marriage with Sindor and what that meant and where it was applied. So I mean, I thought that was fascinating. Like, that makes me more curious, but I think that's just kind of how I'm wired. I
Yeah.
love traveling around the world. I love learning from other people. I love seeing different customs and learning different languages and different food dishes. And I think it's a great thing. I mean, this world is an amazing place and so much to learn. And at the same time, so much that we have in common.
Hmm.
So, I mean, you even talk like about how frustrated Chitra gets with Josh, the yoga instructor, because of using the word that everybody we hear uses, namaste. And like, she's not happy with that. Like, do you know what that means? So it's great to show the differences and the distinctions, and at the same time introducing Chitra and Helen together so that they can find some commonality. And I have to say, Helen is like you, like, incredibly gracious and wants to learn. I mean, she even goes to the point where learning a little bit of Bengali so she can say things to Chitra. And I just think, wow, how wonderful.
Helen is a manifestation of some of the random acts of kindness that I experienced. And as I said earlier, it doesn't take much to make somebody feel comfortable and welcome. So, that particular incident of learning the language so that, you know, the person feels comfortable. It's happened several times in my life that people have extended me that wonderful grace. But the one time I really clearly remember, it was my grandmother. So I mentioned, I grew up in Kuwait. My parents taught me Bengali, but I wasn't very good at it. So when the first Gulf War happened and we got displaced to India and we were living in Kolkata, it was a bit of a struggle. I was still learning how to speak it on a day-to-day basis. And my grandmother, who doesn't speak a lick of English, has spent her whole life in Bengali, one day came up to me and said, "Want 4 biscuits in English?" And so, and she could have said it to me in Bengali. I would have understood. She went to my grandfather who spoke fluent English and said, these poor kids, they are, not only are they, like overnight, their lives have been overturned and just disrupted. But here, they're also having to navigate the language and figure it out. And that was like one of the examples I thought about how, just learning, even it was an imperfect phrase in English, I was like, oh my God, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I think that
So,
goes back to that sense of belonging that I think part of the human experience is we just want to be seen and heard, right? And as our authentic selves, because there's a difference if you read Brene Brown talks about belonging versus fitting in.
oh yeah. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a huge Brené Brown fan.
Okay. Perfect. See, I knew we would
Yeah.
get along. So I think it's awesome that being seen and heard as you are. And so Helen accepts Chitra to a certain extent for who she is, and at the same time wants to offer her different perspectives. And there's so much wisdom from Helen. You know, they're roughly the same age, have had similar life experiences, both widowed, both lost a child, both kind of find some humor in some of the things. But Shitra, that demanding, isn't necessarily as open to trying new things or meeting new people. And I think about that story that you just told about your grandmother, and I'm thinking about the example in the book where Chitra just wants to kind of be seen as who she is.
So there's also a part in the book where Helen goes to great lengths to find books
Yes,
to share with Chitra. And again, it's that thoughtfulness and what I think is that literature is a great way of learning about other cultures. So much of my understanding of American culture has come from television. I will not lie. Television and music, but, you know, just reading books, reading the greats, reading Harper Lee and Steinbeck and, you know, um, reading all of the Judy Blooms. And Judy Bloom, that's why I
it's
pay homage
referenced
to
in this
Judy.
book. Yes,
I pay homage to Judy Bloom in the book, because that's the power of literature. That's the power of books. You think you're writing for an audience. Judy Blume's a great example, and it shows up in the book. Judy Blume was writing for a certain audience in the U.S. Did she ever think that there were kids in the Middle East picking up her books and reading them and passing them along? And in the case in the book, it's in the Arabian Peninsula. Chitra figures out what the
right.
heck the books are all about and has a really, really strong reaction to them. So I do believe in the power of books opening up people's horizons and then just becoming ambassadors for cultures and experiences.
They talk about like armchair travel, where like you can travel parts of the world and see and experience other things. Chitra grew up taking care of her family. And when she would cook specific things for each person at the table. Whereas where I grew up, it was like, this is what I made, this is what you're eating, versus that like extra over the top thoughtful gesture. Well, this person doesn't like this. And so I will make a dish for them. And this person really loves this. So I'll make this particular dish. And they're eating the same meal. They're eating at the same
Yeah,
time, sharing the table, and yet there's like 4 different meals being served at the same time based on her family, her sons, her daughter, her husband's preference. That's just a grand gesture.
yeah. It is, but also in her case, and we even talked about the power dynamics that Chitra loves to play in. Her cooking specific meals for certain members of the family is a power move ultimately. And it is those power moves that now give her the sense of entitlement that she feels at the age of 75 going, I did all these things. I went out of my way. I expect you now to go. And to her sons, she's now like, well, it's my turn now. It's my turn
Right.
to be served by you the way I expect to be served, catered to my particular likes and dislikes. And so, she used food as a proxy for this power dynamics, but it very much is that tension now in the book of I gave you everything you wanted, so now it's your turn to give me exactly what I want, but not recognizing honestly that it's not the same. It's not the same circumstances, it's not the same country even. It is not the same power dynamics that are at play.
Right. And I think about that. And typically, if somebody's going to do a nice or a thoughtful gesture, it is not necessarily to get something in return. It's typically done because you genuinely care about that person's happiness or well being or, making something easier for somebody. So you're right. I mean, it wasn't done in the most genuine of ways. So thinking a little bit more about Helen and her wisdom, and the perspective that she wants to offer Chitra to kind of take things a little bit more as they come and navigate them and not be so. I think you mentioned when we were talking earlier about holding tight so much, and when you're holding tight for something, you don't have the capacity to open your hands for what would be a new opportunity. And so I think, wow, that's a really interesting perspective. And I think we've all had things in our lives where they didn't turn out quite the way we wanted. And then the question becomes, how do you react to that?
Yeah, and it's, Helen pointing out that, yes, Chitra is not in her home. She's not in the home that she built over the years, and she's, definitely not um e- staying with her sons, but like which would have been maybe the second best alternative, and that's not happening. But she's getting time with her kids, and her kids are doing what they can to take care of her. So why not be grateful for that? Why not be grateful for what they can do instead of just harping on what they could have done? But even the could have done is not clear that it would be in the best interest of everyone involved. And so it's also that what I sometimes worry as a parent, I'll just be honest, is sometimes you just think that, I did everything. I did everything by the book. Therefore, everything that should be the outcome should be by the book. But your kids are their own people. They are not you're not sculpting them out of clay,
Yeah.
you know? Um, they're going to be their own people. And so they're going to want to do things their own way and by what they deem is right. And so you've got to respect that. There are incidences throughout. I see it in a lot in some aspects of our culture, especially when it's a diaspora and we're struggling with it. We just want kids to be successful, and sometimes we're like, "This is a playbook for success, and if you veer off this playbook of success, you're doomed." And maybe that's not always the case. Maybe it's okay to veer off the playbook.
But I also have to keep in mind your background is science. You have a PhD
Yeah.
in molecular biology, and science is fact and what can be proven and what there's proof for. So I understand the I want to say controlled environment and realizing that that's not how life is. So there's a little bit of Shitra that reminds me of like this. I want this controlled environment. I want this controlled outcome because I've done X,
Mhm.
Y, and Z, and realizing, like, yeah, that you might have had a great hypothesis, but as we conduct this experiment, we're not getting the outcome that we thought we would.
Yeah, and what do you do? Do you fight it or do you just roll with it?
And Helen says to her, I mean, there are a couple of things I just want to view lines um, where Helen says to her, we can't manage on our own. We owe it to ourselves and our children to get the help we need. And I just think, absolutely. And then the line that kind of hits really hard is, why spend your days thinking about something you might not get? Why not enjoy what you have right now? And yes, you and I are both not 75-year-old women, but that lesson is applicable no matter your age. And so often we get so caught up on what we're wanting that we overlook what we currently have.
Yeah. And I think Chitra is a perfect example of wanting something so bad that she just loses sight of all the things that are good.
Absolutely. And I also think too, I mean, if we think about things, and I know you've lived in a variety of places, I have too, but not to the extent you have, is home. And some people, that home that they have is a place of memory and a place of connection to the good times that they had. And so I understand a bit about that physical sense of not wanting to let that go. Those memories go with us. Yes, they happened in a particular space, and trying to reconcile, like, that's where my kid took their first steps, or that's where we always stood for the birthday pictures, or this is where I fell down the stairs on my way down for the prom date, like all of those things. But those stories, like, I don't live there anymore, but they still carry with us.
And that's what Helen keeps trying to explain to Chitra, but it's something that is so hard to reconcile. And so it is that struggle of do I just bless and release or do I fight to get it back?
And that's a that's a big question. And it's a big question throughout stages in our lives. And how do we know what is worth fighting and what is worth accepting? Yeah, life is complicated. We as human beings are complicated and complex. And that's why it's always great, those people who were open to having conversations and talking about tough stuff. And I think this book helps have conversations, with people and thinking about what their perhaps parents would want or not want, on how they would handle it, and maybe just even a different perspective on the life that you're currently living.
Yeah, and as Chitra is a perfect example of best laid plans can go horribly left. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And the other thing that's really interesting in this book, I don't want to give everything away because I want people to get this and read this for sure, but there are poignant moments. There are moments where there's an art class offered, and Chitra used to paint. And then once she had kids, that she just abandoned that part of her that was this incredible artist, incredible painter, and now has an opportunity to kind of rediscover the joy of that. And so, we all have a lot to juggle, but there's that lesson, at least it was for me, of like, continue to hold on to the stuff that you enjoy doing so that it's always a part of your life and brings you joy, versus like, oh, I can't do that because I have to do this, this, and this. So thank you.
But that's the Chitra's whole MO, right?
Hmm.
So, and the art class. So the choice that Chitra made to give up on the art when her children was being raised, that's another example of, and I can just speak from my personal observations of the Bengali culture and the mother-son relationships. Mother in my culture and what I've seen is somebody who's all sacrificing for the sake of her children. That's the ultimate mother goddess,
Hmm.
puts her children ahead of everything else. And so, Chitra, gave everything up to raise her kids. And then, as you said, when she gets widowed, that's when it finally hits her that the kids are grown. There no spouse to take care of either. So, even having to be devoted to a husband, that's gone, he's no longer there. And so she can live her life on her own terms and do things her way. And so that really feeds into her sense of it's my time. It is my time to live the way I want to live.
Right.
So, she Helen has to nudge her to do the art class, as we talk about in that part of the story. But everything else that Chitra up to that point has chosen to do with her life has been that moment of, oh gosh, I'm beholden to no one. I can do whatever I want to do. And she kind of takes that on steroids when it comes to wanting to go home. But it is that realization of I can do this on my own terms.
She has a mantra that kind of helps change a little bit of her perspective, where if I can paint, I can do anything. And I think true. And it also, I think, true about making sure, like, that you live a life and there's some part of your life, even though you're part of a family and you're doing for your family, to still have that sense of self, because that's completely upended. She's so used to taking care of a husband and taking care of kids and raising kids and doing for her extended family. Like, who is she without that? So I think that bothers her as well. I mean, as it would probably most people, like, okay, now what? And
Well, in
wrestling
her
with
case
that.
now it's now time to, yeah. But in her case, it's like, well, now I just call in all the favors,
Yeah, it's exactly. I just see her like with a book, like, well, this, where she's kept track of everything and expects it all to come back to her. But, things change, things evolve. So
And she did not get that memo.
she did not. Though it's been wonderful talking to you and about this amazing book. Chitra Demands to Go Home. So as we are ending, this is Stories End, final 5 questions. What is your favorite room in your home?
My office.
Your office.
It is Yeah, and I will say it's my office because I decorated with photos of my family of different generations, and so I'm just surrounded by photos of all family members.
That's awesome. I'm looking at photos you can't see over here. Yeah, so same thing. What is one of your favorite Bengali traditions?
Goodness. I'm gonna just say the winter music festivals. I've never attended, but the fact that we have a season of just having outdoor music festivals speaks to how much culture and literature and music play heavily in Bengali culture.
Absolutely. And it forms that sense of community, which I think is fantastic. We just mentioned a little bit that Chitra has a mantra, if I can paint, I can do anything. Do you have a mantra?
Oh, it depends on the time of day.
Agreed.
One mantra I do have is it's an annual one. I always pick something every year that takes me out of my comfort zone. Writing this novel was I would say like 2024, taking me out of my comfort zone. I enjoyed it. Another year, I went and auditioned to sing the national anthem at a Major League Baseball game. I mean, I never made it, but at least I went and auditioned.
That's fantastic. For a Nats game, I'm
Oh,
assuming?
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I went and
Okay.
auditioned.
That's a
Yeah,
great ballpark, by the way, and a
yeah.
great area of town. Okay. The next question is, what's one of the most random facts that you know?
Oh my God, I know so many. Helps to be a scientist, you know a lot of weird things. Apparently, humans are the only animals with chins,
Huh. That's
but
so
I have to go look that up because what exactly is the definition of a chin? So, yeah.
interesting. See, I love this. I mean, as a librarian, I know lots of random stuff, just never quite know. And then I know you're not a huge fan of road trips, but what song would be on a road trip playlist?
Oh my God. This is possibly the hardest question because I would have so many songs. I'm definitely an 80s kid. So, definitely Madonna, George Michael, New Kids on the Block. Like that was my 80s crush. Yeah. So, yeah, it's really hard to pick. I don't know. I would
Artists are fine. I mean, I grew
stick
up
to
in the same with that sense of music, and now they're NKTOB. They were new kids. A huge thank you to everybody who is listening, and even bigger thank you to Rajajandri for such a great conversation. Congratulations again on your debut novel, Chitra Demands to Go Home. It's a story of shared experience that will resonate with so many of you, finding the range of human emotions from fear and frustration to humor and love. To find out who else is visiting, go to storytocount.com. This is Story to Count with Jen Jumba.